I'm Anna. I'm an alcoholic. I'm from Lexington, Kentucky. I've been here for about 16 years, through a big chunk of my drinking and all my sobriety. So I identify with pronouns she and her, and I'm pretty average alcoholic. I had 9 years in June, which is really unreal. And it's been the shortest and longest 9 years of my life. Uh, and also, I think I'm just supposed to give a mini lead, I'm guessing. I don't know if this is a topic, but so we'll just see what happens. But I'm originally from Cincinnati, Ohio. I grew up pretty normally, for the most part, for a Midwestern kid. I grew up in a really conservative Christian home. There were lots of rules. My parents are amazing. I also talk with my hands a lot, so this is really weird to have to like hold a phone and talk. Anyway, I'll get over it. So my parents are amazing. I can tell you that my whole childhood and my life has been filled with nothing but love from them. But I'll tell you that I learned a lot of really weird things from church when I was young. And it's not, in thinking about my alcoholism, I don't place blame in anything. I think I was born an alcoholic, whatever that means. I mean, some of this is so nebulous, I'm not even sure I could really explain it, other than I have this definite little twist in my head when I drink. But I definitely think there are certain things that kind of along the way set up patterns for me that played well into my alcoholism. The other thing is someone wave at me when I'm getting close to time because I can't see my clock. So, but I had a pretty normal childhood, except that I was a pretty anxious kid. And I remember when I was very little thinking about my grandparents who were in California, and at about 4 years old having like my first panic attack, wondering if they were going to die in an earthquake. And that's, I don't think, something that normal 4-year-olds really worry all that much about, but I was really concerned with that. And, that was expressing to me my lack of control, and I knew I couldn't control it, and I felt like so many things were out of my control. And the answer when I was a child was, well, God will take care of it. And there was no real like how-to with that. It was just have faith. And I never really understood faith. And I can tell you my whole life until sobriety, I never really understood grace. A friend of mine always says that, she lives on bonus time, and that's what I'm in. I'm in bonus time. But I now understand that to mean grace to me. But growing up, grace had strings attached to it, which is kind of the opposite of the very nature of the word. But that church taught me all sorts of crazy things. Most of my life, I was very judgmental and such an asshole. And being in that particular church just fed into that. And so I definitely developed through my life this idea of being the perfect person, the perfect Christian, the perfect whatever, knowing full well every day, completely not making it to that. And instead of where some people end up latching onto grace and understanding the love of their perception of God, I really got to experience what I thought was, this apartness from God. So whenever, I would do something that was not perfect or not according, it was just human, I would immediately feel guilt and think that God couldn't really look on me and couldn't deal with me. So my whole, childhood and growing up was filled with that dichotomy of like trying to be perfect, never getting that, and totally missing the point of grace. I've now, through steps have come to understand that my resentment, when I first got sober, I was really resentful toward God, that my resentment's actually towards the ideas that church presented. And I've even gotten really specific about the people and what they said, and had to work through that. But I can now, thankfully, see where some of the things were right. I would say very few, but some of the things I learned there were right. So anyway, I'll tell you that I always, when I, share my story, I always share about this particular aspect. I really thought that I was a sex addict first. That was the first 12-step program that I went to. They were welcoming and wonderful, and I knew I was completely twisted in that aspect. And when I visited that fellowship, it was 12 steps and great, but it was not a fit for me. But when I did my inventory, and when I looked at especially my sex inventory, and I'll tell you, I didn't do my sex inventory the first time around because I thought if I saw the patterns of behavior, then I could just change it. And as it turns out, I have to turn that over to my higher power. but I thought like that was enough, and it wasn't. And so I did my sex inventory way late into the game of my sobriety, and that was a second sobriety basically for me. But I can tell you that when I was my first experience with anything sexual was when I was 2 or 3 years old, and I say this because it took me a really long time to come forward with that and talk to my sponsor and to not be afraid of what that meant. And but I can tell you that in looking at that, that began, a series of behaviors and some patterns that were put into place that were harmful to me, that I just perpetuated, through all of my life till I got sober, and even some after that. So I think that's important. And especially given that I visited a different fellowship first, I think that's really important to know. So about high school time, I was pretty much, if you've seen the movie Saved, you'll know me because I'm the Mandy Moore character. I was totally insanely judgmental. It's the only way I could feel good about myself was if I had this identity to latch onto about being all about my perception of Jesus. And basically what that meant is I could sit back and I could be judgmental toward everybody else. And as long as I was doing better than you, then I was okay. So the big first departure I had from God really was when I was at the end of high school. I dated this guy. He was not about God, not in the way that I was, and yet I wanted to date him. And quite frankly, I just wanted to have sex with him, and I wanted to not feel bad about it. So I departed from God, and I thought, well, that's it. Me and God are going to see each other sometime later, I guess. And that was an interesting relationship. I had always been a cheater my whole life. When I looked at my, selfishness and self-centeredness, it came out in this way of like any man, any dude that was in my life, I'm a heterosexual female, so any dude that was in my life was going to really have a tough time. Anytime they did anything I didn't like, I would find my comfort in other people. So I would, just quietly cheat. And I thought as long as I actually didn't think much about it, to tell the truth. I didn't think much about it, but as long as I didn't get caught, then it was okay. But it certainly didn't, help me in any way to, to grow spiritually or to set up any patterns for honesty or health or an appropriate sexual identity or anything. So anyway, here's the thing. I didn't drink till I was 21, not for anything other than I was a huge dork in high school, never got invited to parties. So it wasn't even around me. But also, I just needed to be better than everybody else. So in Ohio, where I grew up, be at 21, you can't drink till 21, and that's the law. And I was like dead ass determined to follow the law and be better than you. So I didn't drink till I was 21. But my first drink was when I was little after my 21st birthday, I think. I was insanely angry at this guy. We had broken up. He had broken up with me. Okay, so I spent the first few years sharing my story and saying that I had broken up with him. That was a complete and total lie. And then I would say, well, we broke up. And the fact is, he broke up with me, and I was heartbroken. I was devastated. My whole identity was wrapped up in him. And so at this time, I was angry with him. And I'm hearing some background noise, just FYI, in case you're not muted. I'll just say it since I'm unmuted. If you can mute yourself, that would be great. So anyway, so I went over to his house, and I was just full of this rage that I'd never felt before. I had no idea what to do with anger. In my house growing up, it was, two things I heard were, don't be angry and don't cry. And so I had stuffed a lot of emotions, and I was often that kid that would go into my room, shut the door, cry in the corner, listen to sad music, let it all out, and then come out like nothing had ever happened and I was fine. And that word fine haunted me my whole life. And now I try to never say fine. If you ask me how I'm doing, I'm going to try to say I'm okay, or I'm doing well, or I'm pretty good today, or, try to be a little bit more authentic, because fine is a bad word for me. But anyway, so I went over to his house because I was insanely angry at him because he'd lied to me. And never mind that I lied to him all the time, but he lied to me, and that was just unacceptable. And I can see, now where I was putting myself in the position of God, like, you can't cross me, So I went into his room. I don't know. I was really angry, and he left to go take a shower, and he had beer on his, I don't know, his dresser or something. I don't even remember, but I do recall that there was no thought. I cracked open the beer, started drinking. I think I was halfway through the second one. And I just like was okay, and I could breathe, and everything was fine. And it was very funny that I was there and drinking his beer. And I just was like, all that anger was just gone, and everything was okay. And that feeling was the thing I chased. I loved that alcohol poured the fire out of any kind of anger I had, or any kind of sadness. Oh, I hate sadness. That's awful. Any kind of like negative emotions. Now I kind of understand that all of these emotions are good and healthy, but you know, at the time I couldn't tolerate being angry. And I don't remember what happened. I woke up the next morning on the couch downstairs at my house, and that was my first time drinking. I blacked out. I don't know how much I drank. I think I drank most of his beer. I don't know where I drove. I definitely drove, and I don't know, what happened through the course of the night. Couldn't tell you. And that's pretty much how I drink. And from that point forward, like, that's what I did. There was no, I know it talks about in the book, that perhaps we crossed a line, that maybe there's a line somewhere that if we hadn't crossed it, we wouldn't necessarily be in this position. But there was no line that I can recall. And even before I had taken a drink, I knew somewhere in me what it was going to do for me. I just knew it. And it was an automatic thing that happened. So I drank hard and furious for a while, not long. And it talks about as well that there are some people that, it's kind of a hard and fast jump off a cliff, and that was definitely me. So I was in college, and I dropped a bunch of my classes because it was hard to get to class, and quickly got into a whole lot of messes. I really like to hang out with tough girls and drug dealers because I had this thing for hitting on other people's boyfriends, and they would back me up, or I don't know, stand up for me. I don't know. I somehow got out of some scrapes with the fact that they were tough. And I had a good friend of mine who was a good drug dealer. She did really well and was well known. And the funniest thing was, it's not funny, but the strangest thing to me, and looking back at it now, I get it, but we went on a second spring break that year because one spring break was not enough. And we had some really terrible and tragic things happen. Somebody we were hanging out with he overdosed and died while we were all together. And it was, we'd just gone back to our room and come back, and he was dead. And it was really devastating. And on the way home, she couldn't stop talking about how that she had to stop this life, this cycle that she was in. And, I'm nodding along, and I'm like, yeah. And she's like, I can't do this anymore. And in my head, I'm thinking, oh my God, I need a drink. And sure enough, she got back and she changed. She just quit that stuff. She's a very normal drinker to this day. Straightened up. And I didn't have the capacity to do that. I didn't straighten up. I, decided that I would move across the country to California. And so I did that. And before I left, I actually met this guy that I ended up marrying, which is how I got to Kentucky. But I went there anyway, and I thought, a change of scene, and I would get back into church and all this stuff, and that would do me good, and I'd be great. And that did not happen. I ended up cheating on him out there. I ended up in the driveway of my grandparents' house with a bottle of Jack Daniels, not having no recollection of going and buying it. And I just thought, what the hell am I doing here? I can't believe this is happening. So our solution was, if I married him, I'd come to Kentucky. He could keep an eye on me. I could straighten up. And that was a great idea, clearly. So I did that. So that's how I got to Kentucky. And I actually didn't drink for about 4 years. We really did vow that we would not drink. And that vow was enough at that time. That was a sufficient reason at the moment. I can tell you that I was plagued with all this guilt and memories of things that I'd done. I went back to SAA because that was the only group I knew, and they were wonderful. And I didn't know what to do with all of the stuff and the baggage and the, consequences of my behavior, and they, again, were wonderful and welcoming, and not a fit for me, but they were wonderful. So, after around 5 years married, it started to get tough. And what I now know is, like, I had no ability to change or grow. I had no tools to deal with regular emotions. And when things get tough, I would always just duck and run. And that was not really an option when I was married. On the same vein of things, I had gotten back into church, back to being an asshole, back to being really judgmental. And so that was kind of keeping me afloat for a bit. But also this idea that somehow, Jesus would magically fix everything, and I didn't really need to do anything. I've also come to terms with my codependency, that I feel like if I manipulate in certain ways, then maybe things will be better. And that's how my codependency comes out. I try to control everything, and then the outcome will be what I want. And the fact is that there's no ability to do that when you're in a marriage with someone, and when it's not working out. So as things got tougher, I went back to drinking. And again, I don't remember it being a conscious choice at all. I just remember uh, having a drink at one point, and that was it. So for a few years, I drank. I worked night shift, which is a terrible and wonderful idea. If you're like an alcoholic or an addict and you want somewhere to fit in when you're active, night shift is the deal, man. Everything was abnormal. So at like 6:30 in the morning, we would have happy hour, and by 8 o'clock we were obliterated, and it was daylight out, more like out throwing baseball and drunk. It was just a mess, but it was really conducive to my drinking. I burned through a whole lot of friend groups at that point too. I had no clarity on what my drinking was really like, but like I said, I'm a blackout drinker, so I have lots of memories of beginnings of nights and not ends. And then, of course, I started waking up in other people's beds and other houses and not knowing what I'd done. And then this cycle started where, I would do these things and I would wake up and feel that remorse and that guilt and horribly ashamed about it. And I would vow to not do it again. And I would go to sleep and I would wake up for work, and, there I was again, and I just needed a drink. And it was like that just reset every single night. Somehow I would get to the point of this remorse and swear I wasn't going to do it again. And, within a few hours, I would forget, just forget completely what I had felt like. So I got to my first AA meeting in the fall of 2008, and I just landed here because I have some relatives that are in AA on the West Coast, and I had cracked the wheel on my car twice, and that's really expensive, and it was really annoying, and I was drunk both times I was driving, and I thought that's really weird because I was totally out of touch with what was really happening in life, and the fact that I'd always driven drunk. But it was concerning, I guess. So I ended up calling our inner group here, and my home group gives to our inner group, and I'm really grateful for that because this is why it exists. I called on a Friday night, and I was at my wit's end of I don't know what to do with this, but I'm pretty sure I'm not an alcoholic, but who else am I going to talk to? I talked to this lovely operator person who was kind and told me that there were no meetings until the next morning. And that was an 8 p.m. I had missed the 8 p.m. meeting. We now have a midnight meeting here in Lexington, which is amazing, on Friday nights. And I would have killed for that meeting. But so my first meeting was actually on a Saturday morning at 8 o'clock, and I was wrecked from staying up a little bit late because that was late for me. But I remember sitting down in this meeting. It was a huge meeting, and there were a bunch of people there, and all different ages and all different, everything it was just wild. I looked over in the corner, and there was this group of girls that looked like my age or younger, and they were really cool, and people weren't they just weren't what I expected at all. And I listened, and I related to some things and didn't relate to others. And the coolest thing was, at the end of the meeting, this group of girls just came around me and said, "Hey, here are numbers. Here's a meeting schedule. You don't have to know anything right now. Just keep coming back." And I really took that to heart, and thank God for that saying, because they made it clear that I was welcome at any meeting, anytime, no matter the state that I was in, no matter what I thought about it. I could walk into any meeting and I'd be welcomed. And I surely was. And so I went to meetings for about 9 months. And sometimes I went to meetings drunk, and sometimes I managed to get there sober. And there was a morning meeting here in Lexington that I would go to after work. So I was hitting a lot of meetings pretty regularly, that meeting. Every day of the week, pretty much. And that was really important. And I always say this because I think it's, at least for me, as I've gotten further in sobriety, I can feel in myself this impatience sometimes when a newcomer's in the room and when they're not understanding it. And part of it's that I really want them to get this. And part of it is that, oh my God, there's so much nonsense. We get fresh drunks at my home group, and when they open their mouths to talk, it's wild sometimes, right? And when I have this impatience creep up, I have to, go right back to that memory that, toward the end of my drinking, when I would get drunk, the only thing I could think was how badly I wanted to be in a meeting, because that was the place that people were happy, that people were expressing peace in their life, that they were talking about solutions through difficult things. And so, toward the end especially, I would get drunk and I would want to be at a meeting and be sober. And so I would go there. And sometimes I was not sober, sometimes I was. I took a ridiculous number of chips. White chips, silver chips, the 24-hour chips, I don't even know how many I have of those. I took 30-day chips and 90-day chips, and I was definitely not sober that long, but I kept thinking, well, I want to be, so maybe that counts. So I have all these chips from those 8 months where I wanted to be. And the fact is that while I was going to meetings, my drinking was getting worse. And it's like, that idea that AA kind of ruins your drinking in a way. I totally believe that, because as I was coming to terms and relating to things, I was also really angry that I was an alcoholic. So I had a stint in the psychiatric unit, and that was necessary because I felt suicidal, but also I was completely drunk and high on Valium. And even in the psych ward, I was telling them I was okay, that I was fine, and asking them how the weather was and all this ridiculous nonsense. But I was so not in any kind of acceptance mode at all. But the last few months, I knew that I was an alcoholic. I think I had accepted it, but I was really angry about it. And so the last drink that I had a 9-day bender. And I love that word bender. Sorry, I just love it. Bender. It was really not pretty. It was awful, humiliating, and really gross. And I did all sorts of crazy things, and tried my best to kill myself every single day. And also I have to mention, this is hilarious. I have very few funny stories. Let me just say, I'm not a badass. I have very few funny stories. They're all just kind of ridiculous. But I did, while I was in a blackout last week, I went into work, and drunk me told them that I might need rehab. And so they signed me up for a leave of absence. And I don't remember being in there at all. But I did, and they called me on Friday of that week, and they said, your paperwork's in the mail. And I was like, okay, sure. And I go to the mail, and sure enough, drunk me had gone in and signed up for rehab. And so luckily I kept my job. It's the only reason I had my job at the moment. So, but I didn't show up for work. I didn't, and a lot of this bender was, precipitated by a panic attack, that I'd started having panic attacks because I couldn't control anything. And it was, horrifying. And so anyway, that last week was just filled with just crazy stuff. I should have died at least a couple of times and didn't. And by the last day, I woke up, and it was a Sunday morning, and I went to Starbucks because that's what I do. And I was sitting outside Starbucks, and this woman from AA that I recognized from meetings happened to be there. And she came over and sat down, and she said, how are you doing? And I said, I'm fine. How are you? And I had opened my notebook, and I was writing in my notebook how I was going to kill myself. Yeah, because I had decided this is done. Like, I can't seem to kill myself effectively with alcohol. I'd hoped all week that I'd get into a car accident and just die. And it was a really dark place. If you struggle with depression and then you add a depressant on top of it, that can go really poorly as well. And I have cyclical depression, and I've dealt with it all of my life. But so I was pretty far down. And so I listed a lot of ways that I was thinking about killing myself. And she just started talking, and I have no idea to this day what she said. But whatever it was, I believed her. And I believe that she opened the door a crack for me to just have a little bit of hope to maybe try this thing again. Because I had a sponsor, but I never told her the truth. And she came and visited me and tried her best, and was always, nearby if I needed an ear, but I'd never really given anything a shot. I had not worked at any steps. I didn't, even know what that meant. So she convinced me in some way with just sharing her own experience that perhaps I should give this another try. So I put on the shelf that I wouldn't kill myself that day, and I went to the hospital, and I ended up in detoxing and, in a place for 7 days or 8 days, something like that. And then I went on a family vacation, which was really funny because I had to then tell all of my family because I was just a total mess. But luckily my aunt and uncle, who were sober in AA, were visiting here, and I got to sit with them for a week and talk about what is a sobriety thing like. And I heard, different things from them, and they were not at all overly pushy about it. They were the epitome of attraction rather than promotion. So whatever they talked about, which is very hazy, I know that I only had good and hopeful feelings about the future. So But I'll tell you, in sobriety, the first year, that idea of killing myself was on the shelf, but it was there most days. And I had a really hard time getting down with the concept of God. I was so angry with that old God. And so most of my prayers at the time, if I even prayed, which I didn't for a really long time, but when I did finally say, okay, fine, I'll pray, I would just pray, hey, God, fuck you. We got to get on the same page. They said I need a higher power, but fuck you. But we got to figure this out. We got to work this out somehow. And at least it was prayer and it was honest. And so when I got sober, I think there were two things I really wanted. And one was to be honest with another person, no matter the question that was asked, to just be brutally honest and try that out. And the other thing was to cry, because I really didn't have any emotions left in me. And so that first bit of sobriety was a struggle. I took a really long time to go through the steps. That fourth step really wrecked me. And it wasn't because I was so thorough. It was because I had no idea what anger was, or if I was angry with someone. And I had, the complex of, I'm either the best thing or the worst thing. And so with the God concept, she was very clear. You have to, this program is spiritual, and finding a power greater than yourself is vital. And so finally one day she broke it down and said, hey, let me ask you this. Do you believe in God? And that was the first time I got to actually say to myself, do I believe in God? And, the thing is, I don't really believe in anything supernatural. I don't often believe in anything, that's heady or supernatural. I don't know another word for it. I don't believe in anything sort of mystic. But over my sobriety, what I've come to believe in is choice and consequence. That there are actions to be taken, and there are, repercussions from those actions, and healthy choices and unhealthy choices. And then a lot of what I've gotten is acceptance and love and compassion from people in the program. And so nearly every day I can tell you that God, if there is a thing is people. And I have a kick-ass group of friends that reflect truth back to me when I don't want to hear it. In fact, I rely on that. It wasn't great with friendships. I had no friends when I first got sober. And so my first friend in sobriety was this really scary old timer. She was so funny. So she got sober at 17. She was a badass. She'd shot herself in the stomach and didn't die, and got sober young and was hard case and super independent. And of course I picked her to be a friend. And as it turns out, she has been just an incredible friend to me, because she's not afraid to tell me the truth at all. But what I've also learned from her is that the way that my God, my higher power works, is that she'll tell me the truth and then she'll stay on my team. And man, that is super important to me. And she'll continue to tell me the truth as long as it takes for me to see that and accept it. And there's a number of people in my life that do that for me. I go to meetings pretty regularly. So my home group's on a Wednesday night. It's a young people's meeting. I'm not that young, but I love it. We get fresh people. And, like I said, I love, the fresh people. It brings me right back to that place of wanting to give up, and that feeling of hope that I got from AA and from people in AA. But, over time, I've, had a lot of different things happen. Sobriety is not easy. Like I said, I struggle with depression. And so for about 5 years, I was not on any medication until I had a good doctor, but till I got honest with my good doctor. And I went through a really terrible time with an ex of mine, and it was an abusive situation. And he's very charismatic, and my codependency was perfect fit for his, narcissism, and it was awesomeness. And the only thing I did right was I stood up for myself, and I broke up with him, but then it went very poorly, and I was scared for my safety, and I ended up having to take some action to be safe. And so that was really hard, and there was some fallout in AA. Sadly, people are just people. They're humans. But what I learned from that is the people that are on my team stay on my team, and the ones that aren't, I don't really miss them. And I never thought I would be in this position to have an abundance of friends that love me no matter what and are on my team, to then have the discernment to let people go who aren't. And that is super important for me. I had no idea that could be a thing, that I could, have some discernment in my life and in my friendships and cultivate the right ones. And I learned what it's like for people to pick you up and carry you through something. But the depression came back really hard after that. And I had some PTSD and serious anxiety. And I went to my doctor and he said, hey, here's the thing, medication is going to get you stable. And I'm really grateful that we have amazing people outside of the realm of AA that can help. But he was very clear with me, and he is an amazing human. He said, the medication is going to keep you stable, but the tools you know and the things you do with your people in AA, that's going to give you growth. That's going to move you forward. So you got to stick close to those people, you know, and the best words that he could, he basically said, you can either hang out on this medication and it's going to be okay and you'll be all right, or you can be fantastic and actually, have some growth from this. So I did what he said, which was crazy. And it was hard. And that's been 3 years ago. And there is an immense amount of gratitude I have for the program, for, the people that spoke truth to me, that helped kind of slowly take the blinders off about my codependency. And I did a different kind of sex ideal, which was pretty cool because I had to figure out exactly what I was doing in that realm and exactly what I wanted to be. And so it's been, again, kind of just a different kind of sobriety. So every year, I'll wrap up really quick here. Every year is different. It's different all the time. And if you're like me, you don't like change. I don't love change, but it is definitely something I can count on, that it's always going to change and it's always going to be different. My ideas now are that if I'm going after some sort of power greater than myself, no matter how that looks, I'm going to be okay. If I remain completely honest with my sponsor, with the people in the program, I'm going to be okay. And I've worked the steps every which way you could possibly work them, and gotten so many different experiences through that I'm just insanely grateful. I just went through having lost my job, so I was off work for the whole summer, which sounds really fun until you get sick of yourself, and I was really sick of myself. And then life came through in a big way, and I got a job, and so I've been at that job for a few weeks now, and it's pretty amazing. It's an amazing thing to look at what I was like before, this bundle of nerves and this person who used people and men and all these different things, and to now look at the fact that I am someone who I have a kick-ass support network, and I have an understanding of what grace really means. I understand what it means to be walked through something, to be held up and lifted through difficult times, and to walk side by side with others as we struggle with just normal things like depression, or just average stuff like how to be a good worker, how to not be an asshole, how to shut my mouth when I need to shut it and not let that stuff come out of my head, and how to really be a member of AA and to give back. That's, if there's cake, that's pretty much all of it, is giving what I've gotten back to others. So thank you so much for listening to me. And I think that's all I've got.